Hi, my name is Kendall, and 3 weeks ago, I woke up at 1:47 in the morning to the sound of metal scraping dirt just outside my bedroom window. When I looked outside, it was my sister, my own sister, burying a box behind my cabin like she hoped no one would ever find it. But I did. I dug it up, and what I saw inside made me scream. What would you do if your family didn't just forget you, but rewrote the story so you were never in it? They emptied the accounts, tried to take the house, filed paperwork to declare me mentally unfit, all while smiling, clinking champagne glasses, and saying they were doing what was best for everyone. So I stayed quiet until I didn't. What was inside that box? Why did they bury it? And how far will family go to make you disappear without ever laying a hand on you? Would you have screamed too? The sound that pulled me from sleep was so faint, I thought it might have been part of a dream at first. I lay there, blinking into the darkness of my cabin, the air stale with spring dampness and the scent of pine. My sheets clung to me, still warm from sleep, and I listened. The wind had settled. No animals stirred outside, but there it was again, a soft scraping, rhythmic, deliberate. I sat up slowly. The old wooden planks beneath the bed groaned under the shift of my weight. I reached for the sweatshirt hanging off the bedpost and tugged it over my tank top, heart ticking up with each second of silence that followed the sound. At 1:45 in the morning, there shouldn't have been anyone out here, especially not in the middle of the woods, 40 miles from the nearest Walmart and at least 20 from anyone who didn't share a bloodline with me. I stood barefoot for a moment, debating whether it was just a raccoon digging near the garbage bins again, or maybe the wind had knocked something loose. But something about the rhythm of that scraping, it was human. It had intention. I tiptoed to the window. The air was cool against the glass, dew starting to form on the outside. I carefully parted the blinds and stared out across the slope behind the cabin. My breath caught. Two shadows moved through the trees, just beyond the clearing. Figures I recognized instantly, even in the low moonlight. Seraphine and Malric. My sister's flashlight beam flicked across the ground like a lazy serpent. Malric was bent low, digging. Seraphine stood beside him, arms crossed, a metal box beside her feet. She said something I couldn't make out, but the way her shoulders tilted forward, the tilt of her chin, she was commanding, same as always. What the hell were they doing here? I backed away from the window, heart hammering. Grabbing my boots from the doorway, I slid them on without socks and shrugged on Dad's old barn jacket that still hung by the door. The zipper stuck, like it always did. I didn't bother with a flashlight yet. I knew the trail behind the cabin like muscle memory. I slipped out the back door, easing it shut behind me. The air outside was heavier than I'd expected. Maybe it was just the weight in my chest. I crept along the edge of the porch, staying in the shadows. Their whispers drifted toward me, just audible. "Faster," Seraphine hissed. "We don't have all night." Malric grunted, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. "You said no one was here." "She's not," Seraphine replied. "She's never here this time of night." They were burying something. A box. Maybe the size of a toolbox, maybe smaller. It gleamed faintly under the flashlight, scratched and dented, like it had been shoved into the back of a closet for years. I crouched low near the porch beam, watching as Seraphine knelt, running her fingers over the box before they dropped it into the shallow hole. Malric shoveled dirt back over it, quick and sloppy. Seraphine covered it with leaves, then stood and brushed her hands off on her jeans like she'd just planted something. Something precious. They left not long after, walking toward the old gravel drive without a word. I stayed still until their taillights faded into the curve of the trees. I didn't move right away, because I wasn't just scared, I was angry. I knew exactly what that box meant, or at least, I had enough guesses to justify what I was about to do. I went to the shed and pulled out the rusted shovel Dad used to use for firewood trenches. It was dull, the handle a little splintered, but it would do. I grabbed the flashlight from the hook inside the door. It blinked once when I turned it on, but the beam held. The dirt where they'd worked was easy to find. They hadn't bothered to cover their tracks. The ground was uneven, and the leaves were freshly turned. The smell of damp soil rose as I stabbed the shovel in, careful, not frenzied. I didn't want to damage whatever it was, but I also didn't want to hesitate. Every scoop of dirt felt like I was pulling the truth a little closer to the surface. 20 minutes in, I hit metal. I dropped to my knees and brushed away the dirt with my hands, cold now and shaking. The box was lighter than I expected, but my hands trembled as I lifted it free. Scratches covered the top. There was a small latch, not locked, just pressed shut. I stared at it for a moment before I opened it. Inside was a set of documents: wills, tax forms, a notarized letter from a lawyer's office downtown, and right on top, nestled in faded velvet, was Mom's ring. The one she wore every day for 40 years. The one she said would be mine. I didn't even realize I was screaming until the sound bounced back off the trees. Because this wasn't about money, it wasn't about legal paperwork, it was about erasing me from the story. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasing me. The box was still on my kitchen table when the first rays of morning sun crept through the cabin windows, casting long shadows across the wood floor like fingers trying to pull the truth back into hiding. I hadn't moved it. I hadn't even closed it. The contents were too heavy in meaning for me to look away, but too painful to keep staring at. I sat with a cold cup of coffee and my father's handwriting in front of me. The will was there, original, ink slightly faded, but his signature was unmistakable. Notarized, dated 3 years ago, sealed inside the same velvet pouch as Mom's wedding ring and a handful of family photos I hadn't seen in decades. One of them, Christmas morning, 1997, had me off to the side, wrapping paper in my lap, caught mid-laugh. Seraphine, of course, was centered, framed perfectly. The cabin, according to the will, belonged to both of us. Joint ownership. Survivorship rights, and I was listed first. I whispered to myself, why bury this? The answer was already circling in my gut, because it wasn't about ownership. It was about erasure. Before I could dwell deeper, my phone lit up. A group text from Seraphine. No greeting, just this. Family meeting today, 2:00 p.m. My house, estate matters. Be on time. Be on time. No hi, Kendall. No how are you? Just a blunt directive, like I was a part-time employee expected to show up to a job I never applied for. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Seraphine's messages were always announcements, not invitations. Still, I showered, dressed, and put the will in my tote bag, sandwiched between 2 old magazines. I didn't know why I brought it. Maybe to remind myself I wasn't imagining things. Maybe because part of me already knew what kind of performance I was walking into. It was nearly 1:45 by the time I parked outside Seraphine's house. She lived in one of those new builds just outside Asheville, glass front, white walls, no porch swing, no personality. The kind of place where everything was staged for a potential buyer, even if no one was selling. I stepped inside and immediately felt out of place. The scent of lemon cleaner hit first, then lavender. Everything gleamed unnaturally. A jazz playlist hummed softly from speakers in the ceiling. Malric appeared first, shirt tucked too perfectly, like he'd just stepped out of a magazine. He smiled like he didn't bury a box in my backyard last night. "Kendall," he said, handing me a mug. "Decaf oat latte. Thought you'd appreciate the gut-friendly option." I blinked at him. "Thanks." No hug, no handshake, just coffee and a corporate grin. Seraphine followed soon after, wearing one of her neutral-toned power blouses, tablet in hand. "Glad you made it. We've already started reviewing the estate portfolio. Come on in." Already started. I entered the living room. A printout packet lay on the coffee table, each page corner clipped neatly, names bolded, dollar signs in columns. My name was nowhere, no mention of me, the cabin, or anything resembling shared legacy. I sipped the latte and sat quietly on the edge of the couch. Across from me sat our cousin Blake, who nodded awkwardly like he wasn't sure whether to greet me or apologize for being there. Aunt Helen flipped through her copy of the packet like she was checking a menu. Seraphine took the seat across from me and started. "As executor, I've reviewed Dad's holdings with Malric, and we believe the most efficient course of action is to liquidate non-liquid assets, primarily the cabin, and consolidate funds into a joint trust." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Joint, I repeated softly. Whose joint? Seraphine glanced at Malric, then back at me. The family. It's about sustainability, longevity. Removing fragmentation. I looked at the pages again, my name still missing. And what about the will? I asked. She tilted her head. We've consulted a trust attorney. The document is outdated, and Dad's mental state in his final months. She trailed off, as if that was all the evidence needed. He signed it 3 years ago, I said, fully lucid, fully himself. Blake cleared his throat. I think it's fair we at least look at— Blake, Seraphine snapped, let's stay on task. The dismissal was sharp. Final. She turned back to me, softer now. Kendall, I know this is emotional for you, but the bigger picture is clear. This isn't about any one of us. It's about protecting what's left. I folded my hands in my lap. What exactly is left, Seraphine? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like everything was decided before I even walked through the door. She smiled tightly. Don't be dramatic. You're not really part of the trust structure. You've always had a more transient relationship with the family finances. Transient. I felt something inside me click. Not crack, not break, just shift. No one in the room looked at me. They stared at their pages, sipped coffee, nodded as if the meeting had gone exactly as expected. And I realized it had, because in their story, I was never meant to be included. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't crying. I was just absorbing. Seraphine stood. Thank you for coming. We'll keep you updated. I didn't move right away. I looked at Blake, at Helen, at Malric. No one met my gaze. I stood slowly, straightened my jacket, and gathered my bag. Just one thing, I said, before heading to the door. Seraphine raised an eyebrow. If you think I'm going to let you rewrite history without me in it— I stopped, choosing my words with precision. You never really knew me at all. And then I left. Not because they dismissed me, but because I had no interest in playing a role in their fiction. By the time I pulled back into the gravel lot outside the cabin, the sun had already tucked itself behind the ridge. The mountains swallowed the light quicker here than they did in town, and by the time I unlocked the front door, the air inside felt heavy, like the walls had been holding their breath while I was gone. I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. The dim orange glow of the lamp on the corner table was enough to guide me through the room. The box was still exactly where I'd left it, centered on the kitchen table, half open, like it had been waiting for my return. I walked past it, poured myself a glass of water from the tap, and sat down slowly. The wood of the chair creaked underneath me. I reached for the ring, the same one I'd seen on my mother's hand for years. The sapphire still caught what little light remained, even through the dust. I held it between my fingers, felt its weight, not just the metal and stone, but everything attached to it. Every dinner it was worn to, every argument it survived. Every time she'd pressed it against my forehead when I was sick as a child, thinking somehow it carried healing. Now it was here, in a box someone tried to bury in the dirt behind my cabin like evidence in a trial. My hand curled around the ring as I leaned back, eyes falling to the corner of the room where the firewood basket sat empty. I didn't light a fire that night. The cold felt earned, and that's when the memory came back. It hadn't visited in a long time, but it arrived fully formed, like it had just been waiting for the right invitation. I was 12. It was the first time my birthday landed on a Saturday. I'd been planning that party for weeks. Mom let me pick out the cake, chocolate with peanut butter frosting and those ridiculous sugar balloons on top. I made my own invitations with stickers and glitter glue, even though I knew half the people I gave them to would throw them away the minute I walked out of the room. But I gave one to Seraphine. She'd rolled her eyes but took it anyway, said she'd see what her schedule looked like. That morning, I set everything up in the backyard. We had balloons tied to lawn chairs, streamers draped between the fence posts. Dad helped me hang a banner. I even had a disposable camera ready, one of those with the winding wheel you had to click between each shot. I waited and waited. Friends came, some from school, some from church, but Seraphine never showed. I kept checking the street. The sky turned from soft blue to the deep amber of early evening. I asked Dad if he could call her. He looked uncomfortable, then disappeared into the house for 10 minutes before coming back out and saying, she had a last-minute debate team. Mom tried to cheer me up with hot cocoa after everyone left, even though it was May. She said, sometimes people don't realize how important things are to others, but it wasn't that she forgot. It was that she chose not to come. That silence from her, the kind that stretches on not because they didn't know, but because they didn't care enough to be there, had always been the loudest sound in my life. I glanced back at the box. That day, the balloons eventually deflated. The cake was mostly untouched, but the part that stuck wasn't the empty chairs, it was the missing sister, and it didn't stop there. College acceptance letters came in. I got into 3 schools, including one I'd dreamed about since I was 16. Seraphine got into Yale. The day I brought home my envelope, Mom hugged me. Dad said he was proud, but then Seraphine walked in, holding up hers. And the next day, there was a car in the driveway with a bow on it. No one remembered that I hadn't even learned to drive yet. At our family reunion that summer, we lined up for the annual photo. The photographer was trying to make space, and Aunt Helen said, "Kendall, maybe stand at the end. It balances the frame better." Everyone nodded. No one saw me step back and out of center. Then there was Dad's retirement party. It was a big event at the local community hall. Dozens of friends, colleagues, and family. Seraphine gave the toast. She stood on stage, crisp blazer, perfect cadence. When she said, "Our father built everything from nothing," people clapped. I stood by the snack table, invisible. I hadn't been asked to speak. No one even thought to. I returned to the kitchen and picked up the will again, unfolding it slowly. My name was there, printed clearly, above Seraphine's survivorship rights, full legal co-ownership of the cabin. The signature was Dad's, the same one I saw on every school form, every check, every birthday card. This wasn't just about wood and property lines. It was about presence. It was about acknowledgement. They didn't want to split it with me. They wanted to erase any record that I had ever mattered enough to inherit something of substance, and they almost succeeded, but they didn't expect me to dig it up, literally. I grabbed a pen from the drawer and pulled a pad of paper toward me. The first list I wrote was messy, half cursive, a list of every name that came to mind. Lawyers, the notary who once worked with Dad, a woman Mom used to go to church with who now worked in real estate. Then I opened my laptop. The screen lit up the room more than the lamp now. I typed, "Confirm cabin deed at county office, request full account history from Dad's bank, contact estate attorney. Will validation, secure duplicate copy of will, offsite backup, document Seraphine, plus Malric activity timeline." This wasn't just note-taking, this was my counterattack. For the first time, I wasn't just remembering what I'd lost. I was preparing to take back what was mine. I closed the laptop gently and looked once more at the photo from that Christmas morning. I was smiling in it. Bright. Not the half-smile I'd perfected in adulthood, but the real kind, the kind that hadn't yet learned to doubt its own place in the picture. They erased me from the narrative. Now I'm rewriting the story. She wanted me silent. Instead, I left her speechless. That was 3 days ago, and the quiet that followed wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that stretches thin, like the space between lightning and thunder. I kept waiting for the clap, the retaliation, the phone call, but none came. Instead, I got an email. "Brunch Sunday, family only, 10:30 a.m., my place. Hope you can make it. S." There was no subject line, just those clipped words, sterile like a memo, and that fake smiley at the end. I could almost hear Seraphine's tone through it, forced warmth like a polite slap. Part of me wanted to delete it. But another part, the one that still hoped for some scrap of dignity, told me to go. Maybe it was the part that remembered Dad saying, "Sometimes it's not about what they offer. It's about what you refuse to surrender." So I went. Not with expectation, but with intention. That morning, I drove to the bakery down on Chestnut and picked up a Dutch apple pie. The owner, a woman named Marla, wrapped it in foil and smiled. "Family get-together?" "Something like that," I said. The drive to Seraphine's house felt longer than it was. Maybe because every mile carried a little more weight this time. When I pulled into her circular driveway, the first thing I noticed was the fresh mulch lining the hedges, perfectly trimmed. Not a petal out of place, like the yard had been combed. The house itself was just as I remembered, too clean, too curated, the kind of place you tour but never touch. As I stepped inside, the scent of citrus cleaner hit me. That, and some sort of fig candle burning in the entryway. The music playing softly in the background was a jazz version of something I couldn't place, probably on one of her curated playlists titled Effortless Hosting. I held the pie in both hands as I walked in. No one greeted me at the door. I could hear voices and clinking silverware from the dining room. I stepped into the open space, and there they were. Seraphine, Malric, Cousin Blake, Aunt Helen, and two of Seraphine's colleagues I barely recognized but had seen on her social media. "Hey, Kendall," Malric said, glancing up from the espresso machine. "Glad you could make it. You can set that over there." He pointed to the edge of the buffet table, like I was a guest dropping off a donation. I nodded, placed the pie down carefully, and looked around. There were printed seating cards at each place setting, clean, serif font. Elegant, of course. No card for me. Just a folded tent card, labeled Extra. I stared at it for a moment before taking the stool Malric pulled out from the side. No cushion, no back. I sat without a word. The table was spread like a magazine photo shoot. Quiche, lox and bagels, carved fruit, French press coffee, sparkling water with cucumber slices, everything carefully styled to say, "We're a family with standards." Seraphine poured herself a mimosa and smiled at her friend across the table. "So I told the client, you don't need another pitch deck, you need emotional clarity." And guess what? He signed the contract that afternoon. Everyone chuckled politely. I sipped my coffee. Bitter, overbrewed. But I kept my face still. They moved from business talk to real estate trends, then taxes. Malric launched into a half-sermon about long-term capital gains, and Blake pretended to follow along while chewing slowly. It wasn't until Aunt Helen asked, "So, Kendall, how's life out at the cabin?" that the air shifted. Before I could answer, Seraphine spoke. "Oh, she's just staying out there temporarily," she said, smiling at her mimosa. "It's not permanent." I set my cup down gently. "It's my legal residence," I said, evenly. Seraphine didn't even look at me. "Of course, but you know how these things go. Probate, transitions, it's all just paperwork." "Actually," I said, "Dad made sure it wouldn't be just paperwork." She finally turned toward me, tilting her head. "Let's not do this here." "Do what?" "This," she said, voice still smooth but tighter now. "Turn brunch into a legal deposition." "I'm just correcting a statement." Seraphine sipped her drink, then smiled at the others. Kendall's always been passionate. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. I looked at the faces around the table, some awkward, some amused, some neutral. No one objected. No one said, "That's not fair." They just sat in it. I leaned forward slightly. "You've always liked talking over me," I said, my voice low. "But that doesn't mean I wasn't listening." Seraphine blinked, just once. I stood, pushing the stool back with a quiet scrape. "You can keep the pie," I said, looking right at her. "And the narrative, but don't confuse my silence for absence." I walked to the entryway, paused at the door, then turned back. "Careful what you try to erase. It might come back stronger." And then I left. The air outside was cool and sharp, a relief after the artificial warmth inside. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I walked to my car with steady steps. She wanted me silent. Instead, I left her speechless. They emptied the account. I'm about to empty their illusions. The next morning, I was up before the sun. Not because I had anywhere to be, but because I couldn't stay asleep. My mind wouldn't allow it. The kind of restlessness that doesn't just whisper something's wrong. It practically screams it. I wrapped myself in the worn robe Mom had given me years ago, the one with a coffee stain down the sleeve, and shuffled into the kitchen. The coffee maker blinked, 5:47 a.m. I didn't bother brewing a new pot. The leftover from yesterday was still in the carafe. Cold, bitter, stale, appropriate. The box still sat on the kitchen table. Open. Waiting. I reached inside, pulled out the documents again. My mother's ring, tucked into its velvet slot, glinted faintly in the dim light. The will lay flat beside it. I'd read it a dozen times now, each word etched into my memory. Cyril Grant, in full mental capacity, designated the cabin to Kendall Grant, co-owner, survivorship rights. So why had Seraphine buried it? As I leaned back into the creaking wooden chair, I heard her voice from 3 days ago, sharp and dismissive, echoing in my head. It was never really yours. You were just there. That phrase looped like a broken record. Just there. Like I was a stain on the family memory. Like my entire existence was an inconvenient footnote in their curated version of history. A comment from the brunch surfaced. Something Seraphine had said offhandedly to Malric while pouring orange juice. We'll talk about consolidating the accounts later this week. At the time, I'd assumed she meant utilities, insurance, legal fees, but now it rang different. I stood up, went to my desk by the window, and pulled out the folder Dad had always kept labeled Bank, simple, block letters. Inside, I found the old joint account number from Mountain Ridge Credit Union, the one Dad used to pay for big things, property taxes, cabin repairs, Mom's medical bills back in the day. He told me once, when I'm gone, you and Seraphine will split what's left. No drama, just fairness. I flipped open my laptop and logged into the online portal. Username, password, verification code, access denied. I tried again, and again, still locked. A chill crawled up my spine, not from the cold, but from the realization that something had shifted without me noticing. I grabbed my keys, shoved the papers into a folder, and left the house without brushing my hair or checking the mirror. The sky outside was overcast, the road damp from a drizzle that must have come during the night. I drove into town, the silence in the car heavy, like even the radio didn't dare interrupt the storm brewing in my chest. By the time I walked into the bank, the lobby was half full. People shuffled paperwork, clutched envelopes, made polite small talk. I approached the front desk. Hi, I need to check on a joint account that was under my father's name. He passed away a few months ago, and I'm the surviving co-owner listed in the will. The teller, a young woman with the kind of overly cheerful tone they must practice in training, smiled. Of course. Do you have the account number? I handed her the folder. She typed for a while. Her smile faltered. I'll just have to check something with our records manager. Would you mind waiting a few minutes? I nodded. 10 minutes later, a man in his late 50s, with glasses perched too low on his nose, invited me into his office. His nameplate read, T. Gilliam, Accounts Estate Services. He gestured to a chair. Miss Grant, I understand you're inquiring about a joint account formerly belonging to Cyril Grant? Yes, I was told I was a co-owner. He folded his hands. The account has been closed. My pulse kicked up. Closed? Yes. Transactions were made over a 4-week period after Mr. Grant's passing. Final withdrawal was last month. How much? He looked at me for a long second before turning his screen so I could see. $212,489.26. Gone. All of it. I stared at the screen, trying to blink away the numbers, but they stayed. Who authorized the withdrawals? He turned the screen back, clearly uncomfortable. According to the records, digital access was established by 2 secondary signers, Seraphine Lang and Malric Lang. They provided notarized documentation indicating estate authority. No one told me. I wasn't even consulted. I understand, and I truly am sorry. But the bank can't intervene unless there's a legal dispute filed. I pressed my hands against the desk to steady them. Can I get copies? Of course. Let me print those for you. He left the room. I sat alone, staring at the empty folder in front of me. Dad always said, "This account is for all of you. Use it wisely, respectfully." But I never saw a dime, and I hadn't even known it was gone. When Mr. Gilliam returned, he handed me the printouts. I thanked him, then stopped at the door. He hesitated. Ms. Grant, I don't know what's going on here, but if you believe you've been excluded from your father's wishes, you might want to speak to a lawyer who specializes in elder estate abuse, not just probate. I nodded. Thanks for the suggestion. I drove back slower than before, watching the town blur past my windows. Nothing felt real. Not the kids at the ice cream shop. Not the dog walkers in the park. Not the banner advertising the farmer's market this Saturday. Everything looked like a backdrop to a play I was no longer cast in. Back at the cabin, I changed clothes, made a sandwich I didn't eat, and sat down at the kitchen table. I placed the bank statements next to the will. Two opposing stories. One erased me. The other confirmed I'd been there all along. I opened my laptop, created a new folder. Reclamation. Inside it, I scanned and saved the will, the account closure notice, and the withdrawal logs. I dated each file, made copies, backed them up to a flash drive. And I wasn't going to confront Seraphine yet. Not this way. Not in her arena. She'd expect emotion, a fight, an outburst she could spin as irrationality. But I wasn't going to give her that. No, this would be quiet, precise. I sat back, stretched my arms, and whispered aloud, just to myself, just loud enough to hear it in the still room. They planned this, but I'm planning too. She threatened to silence me. Instead, she gave me the reason to roar. The storm rolled in right around dusk, just as I finished scanning the last page of Dad's will for the 10th time. It started with a low rumble in the distance, like something shifting beneath the ground, and by the time I lit the fire, rain was lashing sideways against the cabin windows. I sat cross-legged in front of the hearth, a mug of untouched tea cooling beside me, the rest of the documents from the buried box spread around me like puzzle pieces I'd finally started to fit together. Everything I needed to prove what they were trying to deny. The will, the statements, the ring, the photos, and the one envelope I hadn't opened yet. It was thinner than the rest, no return address, just my name on the front, written in Dad's careful handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. The paper inside was soft, worn at the edges. Ink faded slightly, but still readable. He'd written it a month before he passed, long after the doctor said his heart wouldn't hold up much longer, yet not long enough for him to have lost the clarity in his mind. Every word was deliberate. Kendall, if you're reading this, I hope it means you found what I left you. I couldn't say all this out loud. Your sister wouldn't have allowed it without interruption. But I need you to know something. This cabin isn't just wood and nails. It's the best part of our family. The part your mother loved most. The place you brought life back to after we almost lost it that winter. And you were always the quiet one, the steady one. Not because you couldn't fight, but because you waited until it mattered. Don't let Seraphine take that from you. She means well sometimes, but she needs to control things to feel safe. That doesn't excuse what I'm afraid she might do, but I believe you'll do what's right when the time comes. I trust you to guard what matters. Love always. Dad. I read it twice. Then a third time, letting the ink settle into the cracks that Seraphine's words had left. This wasn't about fairness anymore. It was about legacy. I folded the letter gently and held it against my chest. My heart beat into the paper like it was trying to answer back. Outside, lightning cracked through the clouds, and the power flickered once, then came back on. I stared at the fire for a while, the letter resting beside me, my fingers tracing the edge, and then my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my stomach clench. Seraphine. I let it ring once, twice. I answered on the third. Hello, I said, my voice flat. Kendall? Her tone was composed, controlled, too smooth. We need to wrap this up. I didn't answer. I've drafted the paperwork, she continued. We'll be filing it tomorrow. It's just a formality. What paperwork? I asked, though I already knew. There was a pause. She exhaled softly. Declaration of financial dependency and cognitive unfitness. Temporary conservatorship. It's cleaner this way. It's cleaner for you, I said. It's for your own good, she replied. I stood up, walked toward the kitchen as the wind rattled the windows. You're having me declared incompetent. There's precedent, she said quickly. You've been living alone, off the grid, no job, The cabin's falling apart. It's not yours to fix. Kendall, you're making this harder than it needs to be. I laughed, not out of humor, out of disbelief. Because having your sister committed isn't hard. Stealing money isn't hard? She didn't respond right away. Dad didn't know what he was doing when he wrote that will. He was confused, sick. No, I cut in. He was clear. He knew what you are. That's why he made sure to give it to me. She went quiet for a beat, then said coldly, "You're spiraling, and I can't let you ruin everything our family built because you're clinging to a fantasy." Funny, I said. I thought the fantasy was yours. She sighed, like I was a child who didn't understand a lesson. This is your last chance to be part of this the right way. I looked out the window. Rain poured in sheets, streaking down the glass. Seraphine, I said calmly, you don't get to erase me just because you're uncomfortable with my existence. Suit yourself, she snapped. You're going to regret this. She hung up. I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, the hum of the disconnected call echoing louder than her words. Then I walked to the corkboard above my desk. I grabbed a pen, wrote her name in block letters on a sticky note, and pinned it dead center. Below it, I added a line. Underestimate me. I dare you. I pulled out Dad's letter again, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and printed 5 copies, one for my safe box at the bank, one to scan and upload to a secure drive, one for the estate attorney I was contacting in the morning, one for a friend who owed me a favor, and one, just for me, to keep tucked inside my jacket pocket when the day came that I'd have to stand across from her in a courtroom. Because it would come. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. She threatened to silence me. Instead, she gave me the reason to roar. The courtroom was next, and this time, I wasn't showing up as a guest. I didn't wait for the next move to come from them. I'd learned that the hard way. Every time I stayed quiet, someone else wrote the ending. This time, I would be the one holding the pen. First thing the following morning, I drove down to the county records office. I hadn't slept well. My body was exhausted, but my brain refused to stop playing out scenarios. I parked beside a row of rusted trucks and beige sedans, the kind of vehicles that belong to people who didn't waste time pretending their lives were anything other than work and survival. It grounded me. The records office was tucked inside an old brick building near the library, the kind of place with creaky floors and a smell like wet paper. I told the receptionist I was there to check on any public filings related to my name or the estate of Cyril Grant. She blinked at me slowly, then pointed to a workstation in the back corner. Records Access Terminal. Enter the name. If it's public, it'll come up. It didn't take long. Just 3 entries down, I found it. Filed under Protective Evaluation Request. Date stamped 2 days ago. The request had my full legal name, date of birth, and a statement from Seraphine claiming erratic behavior, financial instability, and deteriorating mental clarity, citing my isolation, refusal to engage in estate processes, and preoccupation with imaginary grievances. I stared at the screen, the words crawling into my bloodstream like venom. They weren't just trying to silence me. They were trying to erase me, again, this time with a diagnosis instead of a shovel. A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. "Ma'am?" I turned. A woman in her 50s wearing thick glasses and a cardigan with frayed sleeves stood a few feet away. "You didn't hear this from me," she whispered, handing me a thin manila envelope. "Someone slid this into records yesterday afternoon. It wasn't meant to be public yet, but it got filed wrong." I took it with careful hands. Inside was the signed request from Seraphine. A pre-filled form with her name, Malrick's witness line, and a pending referral to a court-appointed psychologist. "This isn't right," the woman said again. Her name badge read Darlene. "No," I said, holding her gaze. "It's not, but it's over for them." Later that evening, I stood at the edge of Seraphine's marble kitchen island, folder in hand, eyes fixed on the woman who had once told me, "The strongest people don't talk, they act." She was about to see how true that was. The family strategy meeting had been scheduled under the guise of moving forward. A handful of people had been invited. Cousin Blake, Aunt Helen, two of Seraphine's longtime friends from law school, and of course, Malric, who strolled in 10 minutes late like he was arriving to close a real estate deal, not an ambush. "Glad you could all make it," Seraphine said, standing at the head of the long dining table, palms flat on a stack of papers. Her tone was rehearsed, calm, but condescending. "For the sake of clarity and efficiency, we've outlined a plan that ensures this family transitions smoothly into the next chapter. The cabin has sentimental value, of course, but it's also a liability. Upkeep, taxes, insurance. It's more practical to liquidate it and distribute the proceeds." She made eye contact with everyone except me. Malric chimed in. "We've already drafted the paperwork for title reassignment. All that's needed is Kendall's signature." I waited a beat, then slowly opened the folder in front of me. Before I could speak, Seraphine added, "It's best if we move forward quickly. Emotions have made things difficult, but legally—" "That's enough," I said, cutting her off. All eyes turned. "I have some documents of my own to share," I said, placing 3 neatly labeled packets on the table. The first was the original will, my name, Cyril Grant's signature, notarized and dated. The second was the handwritten letter from Dad, which I read aloud. "I trust Kendall, above all others, to protect what matters." A silence followed, thick and absolute. Then I laid down the third packet, the protective evaluation request, the one Seraphine filed in secret. Blake's face went pale. Aunt Helen looked down at her hands. Seraphine's expression didn't falter at first, but her knuckles whitened around the stem of her wine glass. "What is this?" she asked. "You know what it is," I said. "You filed it, claimed I was mentally unfit to handle property, that I was unstable, that I was hallucinating." "I never—" she started. "You did," I said, tapping the document. "Your signature's right there, along with Malric's." The room had gone utterly still. I turned to the others. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about efficiency. This was about control, about removing me quietly without a fight. I picked up the letter again, held it up. Dad knew what was coming. That's why he left this behind. He knew she would come for this place, for my place. Seraphine's voice finally cracked. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I locked eyes with her. "You tried to bury me in paperwork, but I'm here, with the truth." A moment passed where no one moved. Then, slowly, Blake reached for one of the folders and began to flip through the pages. Aunt Helen let out a quiet breath. Malric, silent until now, muttered something under his breath and stood, collecting his briefcase. "I think we should all take a breath," Seraphine said, voice thin and brittle. "No," I said. "I think you should take accountability." With that, I gathered my things. The courtroom was next, and this time, I wasn't showing up as a guest. The law had frozen their accounts, but I had already frozen their power. That morning, I left the house at 7:20 sharp, my manila envelope sealed and ready. The rain from the night before had left everything slick and shining, and the mountains shimmered beneath a veil of light fog. My tires crunched along the gravel as I made my way into town. My cabin behind me felt lighter, emptied of fear, heavy with proof. I parked outside the county courthouse by 7:45, arriving before the first wave of foot traffic. I knew exactly where to go. The clerk behind the glass didn't ask many questions. She took the envelope, opened it, scanned the list of documents inside, the notarized will, the original bank records, the digital access logs tied to Seraphine and Malric, the letter from Dad. She gave a tight nod, the kind that said she'd seen worse, but also knew exactly what this was. "Would you like confirmation via email or phone?" she asked. "Email," I said. She entered my address, handed me a small receipt, and said, "You're all set, Ms. Grant. This starts the complaint process. You'll get a follow-up call by end of day." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. The courthouse smelled like pine cleaner and cold coffee, the kind of smell that said people here had seen things unravel more than once. I walked back to the car, slipped behind the wheel, and just sat. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel reactive. I didn't feel like I was clawing my way up a cliff someone else had shoved me off. I felt still. By noon, my phone buzzed. The first message came from the court system. Filing 234911 KG. Notice of financial abuse claim filed. Temporary freeze granted on all listed assets related to estate of Cyril Grant. Hearing scheduled. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the message blink on my phone screen. My fingers hovered over the screen before I whispered aloud, "That's checkmate." 10 minutes later, the fallout began. Malric called first. He never called. Only texted, emailed, or passed instructions through Seraphine. His voice was sharp, tight. "You just ruined everything we built." I let the silence hang long enough to make a point. Then I answered, "You didn't build anything. You buried it." "You're angry, I get it." "No, you don't," I said, cutting him off. "You never did. You showed up late to everything and pretended like cash flow made you relevant. You don't understand how estate law works. What we did was calculated," I finished for him. "Manipulative, illegal, but clever. I'll give you that." The line crackled. "You want to fight in court?" he said, voice rising. "You'll lose. You can't keep up." "We'll see," I replied. "I'm not the one who signed into an account I wasn't listed on after the owner was deceased." He hung up. 20 minutes later, Seraphine left a voicemail. Her voice was different, not sharp or smug, just hollow. "Kendall, I think we need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. You're overreacting. You don't want to take this too far. Let's figure this out without dragging it all into court." I didn't call back. By 2:30, the local bank had locked access to all funds connected to the disputed accounts. My attorney had already emailed a notice of representation. The clerk I met yesterday, Darlene, had followed up and confirmed that the protective evaluation paperwork filed against me had been flagged and marked for investigation. The speed of it all should have overwhelmed me, but it didn't. I poured myself a glass of water, walked through the cabin with deliberate steps. The floor creaked just like it always had. The afternoon sun filtered in through the front window, casting long golden bars across the couch. The light fell on the wooden shelf where Dad kept his old compass, still resting in the same spot. For the first time in a long time, the place didn't feel borrowed. It felt like mine. I didn't feel like a guest anymore. I made tea, not out of habit, but choice. I sat by the fireplace, not because I needed the heat, but because I wanted the space. I pulled out Dad's letter again, not to grieve, but to ground myself. His words weren't just comfort. They were confirmation. He had known about Seraphine, about the weight of legacy, about how sometimes silence isn't noble. It's just a way to survive until you're ready to speak. He had written, "Don't let Seraphine take that from you." And I hadn't. The thought made my eyes sting, but not with sadness, with clarity. I folded the letter and placed it beside me on the coffee table. Then I reached for my notebook and began to write, not strategy, not lists, just reflection. I wrote about the first day I brought Dad to the cabin after Mom passed. I wrote about how he'd stood on the porch and said, "This place smells like her." I wrote about the Sunday mornings we drank coffee in silence, and I wrote about what this cabin meant, not just to me, but to who I was becoming. I heard the familiar ping of my email, another court update. This one, a confirmation. Estate hearings scheduled for next month. I smiled, not out of spite, out of certainty. The law had frozen their accounts, but I had already frozen their power. The law had frozen their accounts, but I had already frozen their power. That was 3 weeks ago. Enough time for the court to deliberate, enough time for the headlines to soften, for people to stop whispering when I walked past them in town. Not long enough to forget, but long enough for the dust to settle. The final ruling came in the mail on a Tuesday afternoon. A simple envelope with the county seal, thin like any other bill, but it held the weight of a decade's worth of erasure undone. I opened it on the front porch with a pair of scissors I'd used to cut wildflower stems the day before. The judge's words were concise. The cabin was mine. Sole ownership, legal, binding, non-contestable. The protective evaluation request was declared malicious and unfounded, and the financial records spoke for themselves. Seraphine's license was immediately flagged for ethics violations. Malric's firm launched an internal audit, and, from what I'd heard in whispers at the pharmacy, he was placed on administrative leave while they investigated. The local paper printed a story the following weekend. No big photo, no dramatic headline, just a quiet little piece on page 5 of the Sunday edition. Family legacy dispute ends in fraud charges. I clipped it and tucked it inside the back of Dad's letter, not for pride, but proof. Proof that when the world thinks you're invisible, sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stand still and let the truth echo. Around town, people responded the way small towns always do, subtle. A few quiet nods at the grocery store. A firm handshake from the hardware clerk I'd known since I was 15. Someone left a pie on my porch with a note that said simply, "You were right." Isolde came by one morning with a bouquet of hydrangeas and a thermos of chamomile tea. She didn't say much, just stepped inside, placed the flowers on the kitchen table, and sat down across from me like we'd done this 100 times. "You did it," she said, after a long silence. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I smiled, small but honest. "Yeah," I finally said. "I did. There wasn't a parade, no confetti, just peace, and that was enough." In the days that followed, I turned my attention to the cabin, not out of duty, but out of desire. I stained the front porch myself, the scent of cedar rising as the sun warmed the wood. I painted the trim, cleaned out the old tool shed, hung wind chimes Mom had boxed up years ago. One afternoon, I pulled out Dad's letter again and framed it. It hangs now above the fireplace, the ink faint but unshaken. Every time I pass it, I feel steadier, grounded. As for the box they buried, it's no longer hidden. I placed it on the bookshelf in the living room, not in a drawer, not behind a locked cabinet, but right there, next to the photo albums and the novels I read by the fire, a reminder of what they tried to bury and what I chose to reclaim. A week after the ruling, a letter arrived. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no apology, just, "You could have let it go." That was it. I read it once, then walked over to the fireplace, opened the metal grate, and dropped the letter onto the flames. It curled fast, like it had been waiting to disappear. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt done. I didn't hate Seraphine. I didn't even wish her harm. But I would never forget what she tried to take, not just the property, but the place I held in our family. The part of me she pretended never existed. Forgiveness is a strange thing. It doesn't always come with fanfare or grand gestures. Sometimes, it's just choosing not to carry the weight someone else handed you. That night, after the fire died down and the cabin was quiet again, I walked to the edge of the woods. The sky was clear. Stars stretched across the darkness like 1,000 tiny permissions. I brought the photo with me, the one that had been folded in the buried box. It showed me, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting cross-legged on the front steps of the cabin, holding a fishing pole, my hair tangled and face smudged with dirt. But I was smiling. I sat in the same spot now, 3 decades later, the wood beneath me stained new but familiar. I held the photo in my lap, looked at the girl in it. For a long time, I thought she was the one who got overlooked, the one forgotten in the background while louder people took the spotlight. But not anymore. Now, I saw her differently. She wasn't forgotten. She was the one who endured. They tried to bury me, but I grew roots. In families, betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes, it's the silence, the paperwork, the slow erasure of your name from what should have been yours. What this story taught me is that standing up for yourself isn't always loud, but it is necessary. Have you ever felt like your voice was being dismissed by the people who were supposed to protect it? Share your story in the comments. I read every one. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real stories that speak to the quiet battles too many of us fight alone.